noticed that I look slightly different today. Partly because I've been taken care of by two very, very clever women on the second floor today here at News UK Towers, where they've given me a bit of a makeup makeover, if you like. I've put a tweet out saying whether you like it or not. At the moment, I've asked for people to retweet it if they hate it, like it if they love it. And right now, you're loving it. Only 13 retweets, 442 likes. So the jury is not even out anymore. The jury's back, and they think I look beautiful. What can I say? You know, who knew it could be done? Let's talk to Helen Dale, writer, lawyer and political commentator. Helen, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. I was going to ask if you'd had a haircut at least.
No, listen, I've literally been sitting in a chair downstairs in a makeup room with loads of lights. I'm sure you've done this for television yourself. People
Yes.
sort of, pushing things into me, pulling things out of me, dosing down the hair with some water, some wax. I don't know what they were doing, but this is the end result, and I'm pretty happy with it, to be honest.
It's TV makeup. It's like TV makeup. You've got this smooth face like people get on television.
I mean, to be fair, I do have quite a smooth face anyway, largely because it's quite round and full of flesh. Which is I'm quite happy about because, I don't have any wrinkles. People say, why don't you have any wrinkles? I'm like, it's because I'm quite fat, actually. That's the reason. So anyway, listen,
true.
You've got to be happy in your own skin is what I think. Anyway, listen, welcome back to the show. Obviously, you've got a piece of expertise that we would like to dig deep down into today about Australia, specifically about Australian trade, specifically about Australian agriculture and Australian food, because I never believe these kind of Ramonas, these types who say, oh, we don't want to be importing any food from there. I mean, we import loads of lamb from New Zealand. I mean, why can't we import it from Australia?
Not as much as you used to.
Mm.
Quite a few independent republics ago, I did a talk about this book, Britain and Europe in a Troubled World by Vernon Bogdanor. And I reviewed it for CapEx, and he provided a history of how the Common Agricultural Policy developed in the EU and how Britain was very different before 1973. And to cut a very long story short, basically it was always known that produce from Australia and New Zealand was more abundant, less expensive, and of better quality than anything that could be produced in the European Union, particularly in your core areas, your wheat, your barley, your fruit and vegetables, those kind of things. And before 1973, what the UK did was maintain an arrangement whereby it purchased nearly all of its food from the Commonwealth and almost none from what became the European Union, then the EEC. And obviously British agriculture then, as British agriculture is now, was completely uncompetitive, particularly with those three Commonwealth countries. We've now added a few more Commonwealth countries to them that are very agriculturally productive. South Africa, with respect to wine, we've all had a good pinotage, and the West Indies, particularly Jamaica and Trinidad, with respect, like Australia, to fruit and vegetables, and particularly some of your distinctive fruit and vegetables like plantain, which people have this idea in their head is kind of like a big banana, and it sort of is, but if you go to a Jamaican or Caribbean restaurant, you'll see that it's fried. And the other thing is things like okra, which comes from both the West Indies and countries like Nigeria. So you've added a few countries.
Do you know what I don't see enough of, and it's something I rather liked when I was there? It's a bit like a marrow, a thing called a Christophine. I don't know if you've ever had that in the Caribbean, but it's beautiful. It's
beautiful, yes. And the thing is, so it was always known that British agriculture was uncompetitive. So what happened while all of this produce was coming in from those Commonwealth countries was that British farmers were paid money, direct grants known as deficiency payments, which were basically designed to make up the gap between what they would earn if there wasn't free trade and what they would earn as a result of free trade, because clearly the Commonwealth countries were better at agriculture. Now, and it was joked at the time that this was basically paying them to manicure the countryside. And it was also why de Gaulle kept saying no every time the UK wanted to join the European Economic Community. And de Gaulle said very bluntly, he said, French and German farmers cannot compete with Australian and New Zealand and Canadian farmers. We just can't, we don't have a chance. And that is still true. And it's
because of the size, the scale, you mean?
Australia and to a lesser extent New Zealand, but certainly Australia, has what's known in economics as absolute advantage in agriculture.
Right.
Not all agriculture. My old boss, who was a senator in Australia who represented a rural constituency, I suppose you would say. He was a senator for New South Wales, but a strong rural background. Before he was elected, he was a large animal vet. And even he made the point, he said, Australia's very good at a lot of agriculture, but it's not going to dominate everything. There are going to be some things that will be better from other countries. But a lot of agriculture, Australia has what's known as an absolute advantage. And probably the best way to define that in this context is that nobody can compete. You have to wall Australia out to stop it completely dominating your agricultural sector.
Yeah.
That was true in 1973, and it's true now. Whereas most of the time, international trade operates on something known as comparative advantage, which is where you mightn't necessarily be better at producing something than country A or country B, but it's in your interests to specialize in something where you're almost as good as they are, and let them specialize in something where they're almost as good as you are. So that's a difference. And the European Union has tended to run on comparative advantage, whereas the old imperial preferences and deficiency payments worked on the principle of absolute advantage because of the Commonwealth. Now, there's two other things going on here as well. The Common Agricultural Policy penalised the consumer. And it still does. That's why things are more expensive.
It also protected farmers in a way which was quite, but I mean, protected them in a way which was actually, I would say, counterintuitive from the economic perspective, in the sense that, you know, so many people in this country, for example, were paid more money to grow nothing than they were to grow something.
Yes. This is the problem with something that penalises the consumer, because consumer interests and producer interests are always in tension, and you cannot always just give one or the other let them have a complete win, because you can completely destroy your own industry. Yeah. You can finish up with low standards and, you know, poor food quality. This can happen. So, but what the Common Agricultural Policy does is, because farmers in France and Germany, and this goes back long before the EU, resisted high direct taxation, what happens with the CAP is it slugs the consumer. So you walk into the hypermarché and you pay more for your goods, for produce. Yes. Basically, that's what it boils down to. You do that in France. The deficiency payments didn't penalise the consumer, because a huge amount of British history, particularly the history of the Tory party, has been taken up with guaranteeing inexpensive food to the population of the United Kingdom. And indeed, that was what the repeal of the Corn Laws was about in 1846, which famously split the Conservative Party and kept it out of power for 25, or it was the Tories then, and kept it out of power for 25 years, because agriculture did not like it.
Right.
But the thing is, the repeal of the Corn Laws benefited 90% of the population, the poorer 90%, at the expense of 10% who had a lot more money.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, we actually have the phenomenon, and this is why I strongly suspect after this trade deal is signed, if there is proper free trade with Australia and New Zealand and Canada, we are going to have to go back to deficiency payments to farmers, for the simple reason that you cannot just favour the consumer at the expense of the producer.
That's true, yes. But equally, funnily enough, I mean, listening to Prime Minister's questions yesterday, Ian Blackford, or Ian Blockford as I like to call him, because he blocked me from the SNP, was more or less trying to make out that, you know, the policy from Boris Johnson's government would more or less be a new version of the Highland clearances, and all crofters would be put out of business. I don't think, one, that's true, but also there are people who would say, well, I'm sorry, if you can't run a business at a profit, then what business is it of the government's to subsidise it?
Well, this is the very purist and traditional argument in favour of free trade and not subsidising home industries of whatever sort. Yeah. And my personal view is, partly because the countryside is very blue, so it would be extremely silly for the Conservatives to alienate that quite a significant voter group, and also because you can use deficiency payments in a way that is very advantageous to the UK, and in a way that we weren't aware of in 1973, where it tended to just be that gap between free trade and the absence of free trade, and they were just given block grants. Whereas now you can use it for things like protecting the environment, Do you have a problem with badgers killing hedgehogs?
Yeah.
Do you have a problem with minks killing water voles? Are there red kites or ospreys nesting on your property?
Mm.
Are you interested in rewilding, the reintroduction of
Yes.
beavers? You know, there is a reason why there is the stereotype of the green and pleasant land and the beautiful countryside
Yes.
all across the United Kingdom. You can use, if you're going to reintroduce deficiency payments and have free trade with the Commonwealth, you can use the fact that the Commonwealth does have higher food standards and does have better quality, and it's less expensive. You can use that to achieve an environmental outcome in the UK.
You can, but of course, what we
agriculture.
also know about farmers in this country is they're the least environmentally friendly people in the entire world. They're also not particularly friendly people either, and would more than happily shoot your dog and then give it a warning if it wanders onto their property. But the other
Well, that's
point,
a bit mean. I'm a farmer's daughter, and farmers can be
you
pretty good environmental stewards.
Well, maybe in Australia, but not in this country. I've lived in the countryside, and I can tell you it's a pretty awkward and nasty place to be if you live near a farmer, because they don't give a stuff for anybody who lives in the region. I lived in a village once in Wiltshire, which flooded. The entire village flooded because the farmer had decided unilaterally to plough a field that had previously been fallow, which previously had horses in it and long grass and all sorts of ways of soaking up the rainfall.
And he created runoff.
As soon as he ploughed it, he created runoff, right? And when everybody from the village, including people who had lost businesses, lost stuff, the pub was flooded, everything was done, he just said, it's an act of God. I'm not compensating any of you. Get lost. Talk to your insurance company.
That would have led to some litigation, actually, and some quite unusual damages being paid out in those circumstances.
No, exactly right. Exactly right. But the thing that I find extraordinary as well is this kind of body of the public who mostly don't understand farming or anything about food claim that we're going to now suddenly be inundated with horrible, ghastly meat products.
No, that is absolutely not true.
Yeah, well, let's nail that one once and for all, because it's not happening. It's not coming from America, and it's not going to come from Australia.
Well, I can't speak for the United States for the simple reason that the US agricultural sector is solid, but it's not got the level of absolute advantage that Australia's does.
No.
The Australian agricultural sector, it enjoys absolute advantage because of favourable climatic conditions and what is often called factor endowments by economists, good soils or good rainfall or the right sort of crops or cattle or that kind of thing. These are known as factor endowments, and Australia has greater factor endowments than the US. What that means is that you will not get better beef than Australian beef. You will not get better lamb than New Zealand lamb.
Yeah.
You will not get better fruits and vegetables unless you're getting them perhaps from another Commonwealth country, maybe Jamaica, maybe Trinidad, maybe South Africa.
I mean, I would say this, Helen.
So that's just a non-issue. It really is.
Yes,
it might be an issue with the US, but not with Australia.
Yeah, but I mean, that would be the case if we're talking about mass-produced or mass-imported amounts of food. I mean, it's certainly true to say that if you were to cross the road here from my office and go to Borough Market, you will find some fantastic butchers there who sell you probably the finest beef and lamb in the world, but it's not cheap. It's very expensive. No. I bought a crown roast once for a Christmas dinner, and it was 75 quid.
Yes.
And not everybody's buying that kind of food.
It's like a goose before Christmas, getting a goose before Christmas. They're very expensive.
Right, but if you're an average family... But if you're an average family and you're looking to buy a chicken, for Sunday roast or something like that, you can buy a free range one, which is going to taste better than the bog standard sort of £4 chicken.
The boiler, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, the £4 chicken isn't terrible. And so what I'm saying is that, what you're going to be importing from Australia and America is certainly not going to be any worse than that.
Oh gosh, no. And once again, disaggregating Australia and the United States, because Australian agriculture is very different. I might make a couple of other little points here, not only about the quality of the food. I mean, a friend of mine who's a chef just describes Australia as the world's worst place to start a diet because Australian food is so delicious. It's just of really high standard. But the other thing is, because of its size, it's just basically, there's lots of real estate in Australia. There are properties known as stations, cattle stations in Australia, that are larger than the whole of England.
I'm sure.
Okay, so what you don't get in Australia is this problem that is persistent throughout Europe and can lead to really serious animal welfare issues. You don't get the rates of intensive farming. In fact, the last time I looked at this in any detail, there actually wasn't any intensive farming in Australia now. Intensive farming is what you associate with poor animal welfare, animals being kept in cramped and unhygienic conditions, and sort of all the classic stereotypes of, oh, the dirty farm. I mean, that was what my father used to call it. Now we were agriculture. We grew sugarcane in my family, but there was always the story of the dirty farmer who in this case was dealing with cattle, sheep, or something like that, who didn't have good animal welfare standards, and that was a negative thing in Australia. So you don't have this issue of intensive farming the same way that you do, and it's purely a matter of geography. It's factor endowments again. Australia is a geographically large country with lots of arable land, and so it means it's easier to run tens of thousands of head of cattle and sheep in the country in a way that you just can't here, or you can't in Germany, or you can't in France.
Of course. Let's just finish up, Helen, because we're nearly out of time. I just want to get a quick word with you about the old Google story. I don't know whether you saw.
Gosh, yes, I saw that. It was hilarious.
Now, there's a thing, I heard about this before, because there's a thing called Slack, which I'm not familiar with, I think, but it's a sort of internal, almost WhatsApp-type messaging service.
It's a chat program that people use within companies. Yes. It's supposed to be very secure. That's
right. Claim. Now, I was told about several months ago that they started doing this, where if you typed the word chairman, it gave you a couple of options or said, would you like to do this? I was going to say to you, I had one of these experiences the other week. I think it was at the weekend, actually, and I was just having a bit of a, not really a row with anyone on Twitter, but this guy was being particularly idiotic, and I think I said something like, well, you'd have to have been born an idiot to think that, or something. And as I wrote the word idiot, this warning came up and said, do you wish to review your tweet before you send it? Now, I mean, I've said many things on Twitter which are worse than idiot, but they've never asked me to review it. I don't know whether this is new policy or whether it's that particular word that's a problem, but, what's going on?
It's an attempt to get people to moderate their speech. And it's been going on for quite a long time. I'm sure we've all had the experience. Please, producer, don't launch yourself at the big Ofcom red button when I say this.
Well, he might do
if you have a particular word, if you use a particular word and you find that WhatsApp or Twitter turns it into ducking. Now, unless you are an historian of the early modern period with a focus on the witch trials, you do not want to use the word ducking.
Not very often.
You wish to use another word, a rude word,
yes,
which I'm not going to say.
Thank
and
God.
So it tries to give you advice and tell you, no, you don't want to use this rude word. Now, this has been happening to swear words for as long as I can remember using social media, I have to say. So it's probably a decade. I don't know whether it's that long, but it feels like a long time. This is just another version of that. And it's a version of predictive text, but it's also the idea that other people get to put words in your mouth or tell you how to speak or to police your speech. And maybe it's valuable for some people if they're bad at spelling or they swear a lot or are at risk of saying something very rude.
Yes.
But by the same token, there is a part of me, I'm sitting here going, I've been a professional writer for 25 years.
And those of us I will choose
my words, thank you.
Very much so, and that's very much what I said yesterday when we talked about this, because, I know about words. I've used words all my life. I've made a living out of words, either writing them or speaking them, and I really don't need some, bearded wonk, for want of a better phrase, in California telling me what I can and can't say. Thanks.
And the other thing they do is they try to make everybody spell using American spelling.
Yes.
That's the other thing I've noticed. And it's the same thing. It's just infuriating. It's an attempt to pretend that everybody lives in Silicon Valley and has Silicon Valley values and mores.
Yes.
And it's very irritating because there are other varieties of English in the world that do have different traditions and different uses of language. I mean, there was a period there on Twitter where just about every single Scottish or Australian friend that I had was continually getting suspended.
Yeah.
And they were getting suspended for banter.
Right.
I had friends of mine get suspended Scottish friends, because they used a swear word at me. And they're my friends.
Yes.
They're people when I go up to Scotland, I go to the pub with.
Well, exactly. And that's the whole point of what social media is supposed to be about, is that you're supposed to be able to be social. Helen, got to run because we're late, but thank you very much indeed. Helen Dale, writer, lawyer, political commentator, giving us the lowdown on how great Australian food is. Don't